Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for coming on and tuning in and listening to us tonight, or even listening to the recording as well. It's really lovely to have you all here with us. We are all part of Seed Wellness UK, and Seed Wellness comprises of a collective of expert practitioners working alongside and independent of GP-led care. And that provides a integrated approach to your health and well-being. So there is lots of practitioners, all different disciplines, and it's so wonderful that we get to work so closely together as well. So Seed Wellness Virtual Community Cafe is running every month now. And this is giving people the opportunity to get some value from our amazing holistic practitioners in regards to whatever topic it is that we're focusing on. But also gives you that opportunity to connect with these individuals personally. We have a breakout room at the end of each session for specific questions if you want to be connected with that practitioner personally, and also maybe for that potential future support as well. So tonight we are obviously going to be focusing on neurodiversity in adults. Now, around 15 to 20% of the UK population is neurodivergent, which is huge. And it's estimated that 2.5 million adults in the UK are undiagnosed, which again is a very, very big number. And this means that, oh, sorry, just letting people in. Ooh. This means that millions of adults process information differently, and the brain works differently. And there's also other implications, like unemployment is significantly higher in neurodiversity populations than neurotypical individuals. So it highlights the challenges that are experienced as well. And so many have challenges of being misunderstood by others and themselves. They have higher risk of mental health challenges such as anxiety and depression, social isolation and burnout, which then sometimes relates to that lack of adjustments in their life and masking and lack of awareness in the workplace and self-awareness, which leads on to things like burnout and ultimate fatigue. But this doesn't have to be the story. You know, awareness is improving every single day and support is becoming more and more readily available. And that's what this call will touch on tonight. So you can be more aware of maybe what is out there, of how things can affect you, and even some tips to take away as well. Because it starts with understanding yourself and your needs and having that self-awareness. There are so many strengths of a neurodivergent mind. There really is. So when you know how you can support yourself and your life, it can actually really positively impact you as well. So I'm going to move on and introduce our first practitioner here at Seed. We're going to be speaking with Michelle Smith. Now, Michelle is a nutritional therapist. So I want to ask you, Michelle, from your perspective, because I know that you work a lot with people with neurodiversity, and sometimes you see a huge connection with nutrition as well. So, you know, I want to ask you, what is it that you do, and how do you support neurodiverse adults from a nutritional perspective?
Yeah, I do. And there's so many things to say, but yes, I do. So obviously neurodiversity is quite broad. And in my clinic, I guess I see quite a lot of ADHD more than anything else. And it isn't that someone's coming to see me necessarily because they have ADHD and they say, I'd like some nutritional therapy around that. That's just part of someone's picture, and that's can be a contributory factor to some of the symptoms and the things that they're seeing. So I'm going to talk about several things. I'm going to talk about the gut and brain and connection and some help for nutrients and some testing that we can do. But I think the first thing to say is when we're talking about someone with ADHD, it can be quite hard and can be quite overwhelming. And that can be a starting point for someone to say, all of this is really lovely, but I can't meal plan. So can we just start right at the beginning? Because it's, quite a lot of overwhelming information. Someone can say, I understand all these things. I know I'd feel better with those strategies, but actually I can't necessarily, it's too much to think, I've got to feed my family every single day on repeat. And I can't cope with shopping for the week or planning food for the week. And therefore I'm a little bit more hectic. And that's a really strong picture, or a common picture. And I can, help with that strategy of going, okay, we're going to do 3 days at a time, or we're going to do 4 weeks at the time. And then you don't have to think about it again. So often it's putting strategies in place at first before we can really get under the skin of saying, well, these are the things that we can do to start helping you feel better. So that's a common starting point. So I wouldn't want anyone to think, oh God, that's all too much. It's too hard. I can't even try those things, because I can help people with some tips to do that. And there's some stuff on my Instagram as well, I'm sure we'll talk about, or we can look up on the seed later, but there's some helpful tips there. So I guess a starting point is, we know the gut and brain have a really big connection, and we talk about that with a lot of different practitioners and a lot of different modalities. But our brain and our guts are in constant conversation. And why is the brain important? Well, we know there's we have different neurotransmitters, and we might have someone with ADHD, maybe you haven't got high amounts of dopamine, or maybe it's that you're producing the right amount of dopamine, but actually you churn through it. That can be really common. You're churning through it really quickly. So you're making it, but then actually you're burning through it. So we need to support that production, right? And our gut and our brain are, as I say, it's a dual highway. So our brain talks to our gut and our guts talks to our brain. So therefore it makes sense that what we're putting into our gut can influence that brain, right? So if we think of our very first starting point, if we have an imbalanced blood sugar, and by that I don't mean, oh, you eat loads of sugar, I don't mean that at all. But if we eat, if we eat carbohydrates without fats, without proteins, they hit our blood sugar really quickly. And our brain's major fuel is blood sugar, but it doesn't like spikes. It likes a really nice, steady supply. And when we have spikes and when we have falls, that can be really disruptive to actually how our brain chemistry works. It can be disruptive to our neurotransmitters. It can be disruptive for all the conversations that happen in our brain. And as we know with ADHD and other neurodiversity, it can be really noisy. Brains can be really noisy and hard to concentrate. So the last thing we want is a really unsteady fuel. So the way that we can get through that is often you think, and we can do it quite innocently, right? If we start our day with a coffee, if we have caffeine on an empty stomach, that can signal to the brain, oh, glucose is coming, and then glucose doesn't quite come, but it releases a cortisol, which is our stress hormone, which then talks to our liver, that releases glucose, that's a glucose supply into the bloodstream, and then we've got high blood sugar. So we haven't had a massive donut, we've had a coffee, right? We've had a coffee without thinking about all the other foods around it. Or we can have a juice, or we can have a smoothie that hasn't got nice protein in it. And all of that just starts a roller coaster for an imbalanced blood sugar. However, if we think, oh, I'm going to make a whole buffet for my breakfast, if we're going to make the time to do that, or we're going to focus on protein, if we're going to focus on lovely fats, or we focus on whole grains like whole oats or whole brown things, really nice seedy bread if we're going to have that, and then we put a nut butter on it, for example, we're keeping that really nice starting steady fuel. So that's a really important starting point to think about how can we keep that blood sugar steady. Sorry, we're going to ask a question, or I'm going to talk on.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I was mesmerized by what you were saying.
You look like you're going to say something.
Go on, carry on. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, so if we think about protein, if we think about that nutrient protein, so protein, if we break it down, we call them Lego blocks, it's amino acids. And amino acids are what we make some of our neurotransmitters from. Okay, so protein is really important for informing that. Now, what does protein look like? If we're looking for a nice, clean, lean protein, if you eat meats and you eat fish, that would be like chicken and eggs and Greek yogurt. Lots of people don't necessarily eat that. So then we're thinking about lentils, or we're thinking about beans or nuts of how we get our protein source. So that's really nice sort of building blocks of how we're going to make those. Then if we think about the conversations that happen within our brain, we want them to be really nice and fluid. And I know that sounds odd, but neurotransmitters are just a series of conversations. And for them to work well and converse properly, we want it to be really nice and fluid. So then we think about things like omega-3 fatty acids, right? That's a really key nutrient for the brain. And we get omega-3 fatty acids from fish primarily. If you're vegetarian, we can take it from nuts like walnuts, flax seeds, chia seeds, but they're really important nutrients for us to think, okay, how am I going to get my fish in? How am I going to get fish in? How am I going to get omega-3 fatty acids? So they help the conversations happen, but they also lower our inflammation within our body. And we know that sometimes we can have quite inflammatory disorders that then affect our brain chemistry, and we can almost have quite a temporary ADHD, if you like. I know that's not what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about really diagnosed, long-living ADHD. But we can have something that's quite transient when we have a lot of inflammation within the body. Should I talk about some other nutrients, or should I keep talking on?
No,
Yeah.
you're absolutely
So,
fine. You know,
fine.
I find it so interesting what you're saying, because I think that just is we don't realize sometimes that our own simple habits can sometimes be just working against us, and it's something that we don't even think about, like you said about having a coffee. I mean, how many of us probably start coffee with like the beginning of the day? And if you are a neurodiverse individual, then actually you don't realize that that's working against you. And I think, you said it was key about the preparation. I think when we think about nutrition, we often think about what we're putting into our body, but it's actually so much more than that. It's the prep and the thought and everything else that goes on
Yeah.
as well, which I think is so good. Do you ever see certain kind of symptoms or connections that you recognize in people with ADHD that should be addressed by looking at their nutrition?
Yeah, we do. And it can be particularly neutral. So we can see things, I guess, on different levels. It's really common actually with ADHD to be, or often common, to be depleted in certain nutrients. Now, that might follow a virus. We know there's huge connection between something like long COVID or a post-viral syndrome. And that is where we really deplete our nutrients. And then you can imagine if you've got low iron, if you've got low zinc, all the really key things for our brain, because our body's had to fight a virus perpetually, we become depleted, and that can have an effect on our brain. So if that is part of someone's picture, that's the first thing that I'm looking at. Sometimes, it's really important with a client or with yourself, if you're thinking about yourself, to often think back and be like, okay, is there a point where this started? Sometimes we can look back to be like, oh my gosh, yeah, 20 years ago I went traveling and actually I was really, really sick. And then ever since that, my gut hasn't been quite right. So if a gut is part of someone's picture, it's really interesting to look at with there's all sorts of different, I love doing stool tests and really looking at actually what is in the gut, and is there something that becomes quite prevalent and quite dominant that has a knock-on effect on the brain. Is there a dysbiosis, which means an imbalance in bacteria that we can really start to address? And it's amazing when we start to address those things that actually you can have quite a positive effect. um, and then, it was also, I guess, broader picture as well. If we're thinking about, is someone in perimenopause? Is someone got a thyroid imbalance? There's all sorts of things. We're looking at fatigue, we're looking at burnout. And then, I know you're going to talk to Adele about hormones in a minute, but we can look at, is there a depletion, and then is there effect from at a broader hormone level?
I think that's so it's so good, because I think it just shows how holistic we are, and we're going to come on to Adele now, but just that whole thing of where sometimes, whether it be hormones, whether it be nutrition, whether it be something else, sometimes it can mask or even present as something else. And it's really important to kind of really dive deep and have a look at all those aspects, which I find so interesting. Thank you so much, Michelle. You've got
And
so
yeah.
much to offer. It's so if anyone does have any specific more specific questions for her, obviously we'll do breakout rooms at the end, where you can ask those questions, and you can always connect with her as well, to
Yeah.
get some more information too. So obviously, like you just mentioned, Michelle, about the hormones, and that leads me on to Adele Wimsett. Now, Adele is a women's health practitioner, and she works with a lot of neurodiverse adults. So my question to you, Adele, is what is it that you do, and do you see any connections between neurodiversity and hormonal changes?
Yes, is the short answer to that. So I am very passionate about empowering neurodivergent women to understand the impact their hormones have on their lived experience and their traits, because hormones directly impact neurotransmitter sensitivity. So, for example, estrogen sensitizes dopamine and serotonin. On the flip side, it also sensitizes histamine and glutamate, which act like neurotransmitters and have quite a stimulatory effect on our nervous systems. And as a neurodivergent woman, I'm well aware that we have the Rolls Royce of nervous systems. We pick up on everything. And so our nervous systems are on, which is very depleting for our adrenals over time and can be quite disruptive of what we call the HPO axis, which is how our brain's communicating with our ovaries and our hormone production. So I like to take a multi-layered approach to say what's going on with adrenals, what's going on with blood sugar. Because just as I've said, estrogen's playing a role with the neurotransmitters, so does progesterone. So progesterone stimulates or sensitizes and works directly with something called allopregnanolone and GABA, which is very calming. It's like Valium for the nervous system. So these hormones, the levels and the ratios, particularly in that luteal phase, are really, really important to a woman's lived experience. And we have very limited studies that have been undertaken, But what we do know is that ADHD women are much more likely to have postnatal depression. So this is a really vulnerable time for ADHD women. We're much more likely to have something called PMDD, which is extreme PMT, which is debilitating. We're also more likely to have a much more challenging perimenopause compared to neurotypical women. So we're starting to get data that is validating an ADHD woman's experience in relation to her hormones. What we're not getting is the why. So lots of the work that I do is about looking at the whole body, what is happening, and creating a space to really understand and explore HRT and hormone replenishment if that is a path we wants to go down. Because there is a lot of misinformation out there. Women are very confused. Very typically, our ADHD, we love to find solutions. We never accept no as an answer. So we're always curious as to, well, if I can understand why this is happening, then I can find a solution to it. And this is where this can fall down for us because our already overburdened nervous systems go out there, try and get the information, get completely overwhelmed, particularly with contradicting information. And then we go into paralysis. And we don't know what to do about that. So just in some of the work that Michelle did, blood sugar balancing, so important. Nervous system support, so important. For me, progesterone replenishment is a really important pillar as well. So my focus is about stabilizing the body with these three things. And then once we're stabilized, then we can start to go deeper into gut. Then we can start to go deeper into liver methylation and how that might be affecting us because we increase the bandwidth. We start to say, okay, let's make you feel safe in the body because quite often we haven't for decades. Let's make the body feel safe with some simple strategies. And then let's start to look at how we optimize. But these hormones are having a significant impact on our traits and on our mood throughout our cycle and throughout our lifespans.
Oh, I absolutely love that. And I think, that's something that I think I'm seeing a hell of a lot in women my age, like you say, coming into that time where we've kind of just muddled through. And now suddenly when we are having these hormonal changes, we're suddenly going, hang on a minute, like actually I think I could be ADHD or, because it is those hormonal changes that almost exacerbate so much. And then when you start to actually have a look at that, it almost makes sense of your whole life.
Absolutely. I call it the unraveling. You look back and go, oh, that's why I did that. Or that's why that happened.
Absolutely.
And that's why I did my study on perimenopause, because that is a really vulnerable time where the lid comes off. Lots of ADHD women, highly functioning, been the women that had all the plates spinning in the air, very driven. And then perimenopause hit and we think, what fresh hell is this? Because all the strategies that we had simply don't work anymore. We get very overwhelmed. Our capacity minimizes. We don't have the buffer of progesterone. Estrogen usually remains quite high, but progesterone begins to decline from 35 years onwards for most women. ADHD women tend to go into perimenopause earlier. But progesterone is a nervous system regulator and a mood regulator. Without sufficient levels, we will not be able to regulate properly. So no wonder the lid comes off in this time.
Yeah. And it's almost an evolution. I find it's not necessarily, so a lot of people often talk about like perimenopause or going through menopause as almost wanting to, I'm a health and medical coach, so you're kind of wanting to go back to what they was, but it's not a going back. It's very much a evolving
recalibration of the whole body. 15-year brain recalibration, body recalibration, gut recalibration, the whole thing.
Yeah, I love it. Absolutely love it. So obviously you speak, like you said, like we. So obviously maybe you're a neurodiverse individual yourself as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
But does your practice change when dealing with neurodiverse individuals, and how do you support those people?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I get a lot of feedback from ADHD women. I am ADHD myself, in case you hadn't guessed. And for me, I think there's something really validating about me being able to say to an ADHD woman, all of your ADHD is welcome. You don't need to mask with me. You can interrupt me, ask me questions, take the mask off. We talk about rejection sensitivity dysphoria, because quite often if we're given a list of things to do, we might sit and nod at the practitioner, go away and like think, best will in the world. ADHD are like, right, I've been given the data, clear the cupboards, go, go, go. This is what's changing. And we take on too much too fast, completely overwhelmed. And then we go into paralysis. And then we ghost our practitioners because we feel full of shame that we haven't done all the things that we said we were going to do. So it's bringing that into the light and just say, this is what your ADHD is going to want you to do. I'm going to hold your plan, and you're going to want to change everything overnight, but that's not going to work for you. So what I'm going to do is we're going to get this right first. Let's really embody this at a pace that works for you. And quite often ADHD women, because I work with women, but this applies to all, we're perfectionists. Okay. So we see the Instagrammable picture of what we should be eating. For example, we know we should have the plate with the avocado and the rocket and the salmon and all the bits. There's a lot of steps involved in that. Some days we might have capacity for it. Other days we might not. But what can happen is we go into paralysis and we do nothing. So because we're not eating what we know we should be eating, we just won't eat anything. Okay. So I say to my women, if you're going to do that, I'd rather you ate cake, right? I need your body to start. I need you to have a habit of starting to eat. And then we up level step by step by step by step. We don't want to stay eating cake. We want to move up, but we want to do it in a way that the body can work with. So I look very much at, instead of taking things away, I up level. So for example, one woman I worked with, she said, I will change anything, but do not make me stop eating chocolate chip Weetabix for breakfast, lunch and dinner. I was like, okay, we're going to have to work on this. But what we did was go, okay, can you add some collagen into the milk? Can you add some MCT oil in? Can you add some hemp seeds in? So over time, her blood sugar was regulating a little bit more. Her capacity was increasing. And then we could go up to a next step, up to a next step. So we don't change everything overnight. We welcome the ADHD traits and we give permission that sometimes you're going to come back to a session and go, I've not done anything. And that's okay, because life has lifed you. Okay, so I think it's giving permission to just be fully ADHD, really, and welcome it
I
all.
love that. And seriously, I've taken so much from you already. That was amazing. So I'm sure that the people, there's lots of questions that I'm sure that people would love to ask you. And we will be breaking out, as I said, we'll break out into the rooms at the end. But thank you so much, Adele, for sharing wisdom. And we've definitely got more to come, that's for sure. Okay, so I'm hoping that everyone's kind of taken so much away already, because I think it just shows again how holistic we really are and how everything is just affected by so many different aspects within and outside of us as well, and how that evolves as we age and how we evolve through life as well. So I want to move on to our third practitioner, Alison Bell. Now, Alison is a Heal Your Life coach. So I want to ask you, Alison, how does your service support neurodiverse individuals, and what is your primary focus for your support?
Hi, yeah. So as a Heal Your Life coach, my work and approach is based on the teachings of Louise Hay, who was a pioneer in the self-help movement many moons ago. And those teachings are helping us to cultivate self-love and self-compassion with ourselves. And I think that's really important, because I think typically we're all quite critical of ourselves. And I think that can be exasperated as well if you've got neurodivergent as well. And one of the tools we use, which I'm just going to focus on today, is we use affirmations, which can help us in that transition from maybe a negative spiraling thought or a feeling to a more positive one, or one that is a better feeling thought, rather than going from negative to positive and that jump being too big. It's just a better feeling thought than the negative one. And I think sometimes we need to almost become aware of the negative thought, almost become aware when we're in that negative cycle, in order to stop in that moment and then reach for a better feeling thought. And affirmations, which probably most people have heard of, sound really simple, but in the beginning, when I started doing this work, I found it quite difficult to create and come up with an affirmation. I didn't even know how to. It's almost like I was learning English again, trying to formulate an affirmation, something that was present tense, positive, and about ourselves, so personal to ourselves. So I've got some affirmations. I'll give you 3 affirmations in a moment, just to share, to see if you can almost like try them on for size, to see if you feel like that feels good to you. So I'll share 3 of those in a minute. But I think what's also important to bear in mind is to keep them short, especially in the beginning. And my default one is, I am safe. I am safe. All is well. I am safe. It seems like to be the one that I could, no matter what, remember. because I think when we're in that spiraling negative cycle, our brain almost goes offline, and it almost connects into what Adele and Michelle have been talking about. It just goes offline, and we don't necessarily think about the tools that we've got available to us. So it's about keeping them short, so that I always know I can always reach for those ones. All is well, I am safe, to bring and calm the nervous system. You could put them on post-it notes, which is super popular, and you can put them around the house, put them on your bathroom mirror, so that every time you go and brush your teeth, you're reminded of a positive affirmation that you know feels good. You can say them while walking, so you can just you can stack it onto something that you're already doing. So you could be saying them while you're brushing your teeth, going for a walk, sitting in traffic, that sort of thing. Or you can even whisper them instead of speaking them out really loud. So that's quite nice. I do that with my son at bedtime as well. Sometimes if he can't sleep, we whisper affirmations, and that works really well. So I'm going to give you 3 that I wrote down earlier today, which I think are really lovely. And even they're just like little reminders to ourselves. So the first one is, we are all unique, and I bring my own uniqueness to this world. And I think that's great for all of us, because we are all unique. There's nobody else like us on the planet. And so we're all unique, and each one of us brings our own uniqueness to the world. And that is quite a long affirmation, but if you've got that written on a post-it note or recorded somewhere, it's really lovely to reaffirm that all the time. Another one I've got is, I'm learning and growing. So I think sometimes we can be really critical of ourselves, but if we have that compassion that we're learning and growing all the time, and next time we'll do something differently, I think that can help. It's a compassionate thought. So I think that's a good one. And another one, I'm learning to honour how my mind works. I think that's really good, because like you said at the start, Steph, all our minds work differently. And in fact, I heard something this week, and it said there are 8 billion people on the planet, and on this world, but actually there are 8 billion worlds on this planet, because each one of us will be looking through a different life experience. So, and the last one, I know I said 3, but I'm going to say 4. I release the need to compare myself to others. I think that's, again, comparison is rife without humanity. But if we release the need to compare ourselves to others and just love and accept ourselves exactly as we are, that's where I help people get to that place, and they can move forward positively in their life from that place. So hopefully that's been really helpful.
Yeah, I love some of those, and I'm actually going to steal them for myself, because I think that really highlights like self-acceptance, which I think if you've spent a life of masking, trying to fit in, I think that really is important. And like I'm a health and medical coach myself, and I often, like, my specialism is working with people who are living with conditions and diagnoses, but I also see a lot of people who are stressed and burnt out, and a lot of those burnt out people are neurodiverse individuals. And so this sort of stuff, like the affirmations and and that kind of, when you said there, one of the things that I often find comes up is the comparison, and that happens so much. And what I see a lot in my neurodiverse individuals is using the word should. Yeah. And I always say to them, whenever you use the word should, there's an expectation there that you're not actually sure of what it is. And it's your chance to get curious with it, because it's usually in comparison or an expectation, or it's that pressure of should be something, should do something, and actually you have to kind of look at that and go, what does this mean to me? Do I let this go because this actually isn't mine, or it's not serving me, or do I turn this into action and create something special from that? So
I love that, Steph, because Louise Hay talks about the word should, and she said it should be completely out of our vocabulary and not even be in the dictionary, because it makes us wrong. every time we use the word should, I should be this, I should do this, I should eat the right foods, I should do, whatever it could be, you're making yourself wrong before you start. And actually, what you can do is turn that around and say, if I really wanted to, I could. And like Adele said, on the days that you're having a bad day, eat something, but don't just go without. So so that was one of Louise Hay's exercises, if you like. And so we say stop shoulding on yourself, which I think is a really good one.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
It's really lovely to listen to you. And I think so there's just so much to take away already, like I say, from so many different perspectives that, we can really start to look at ourselves and how we can support ourselves as well. So lastly, we're going to move on to our final practitioner, Linda Stevens. Now, Linda has an extensive background in working with neurodiverse individuals, especially working with children from a reflexologist perspective as well. So I know that you, Linda, have a lot of knowledge about the whole referral process, and this can feel like a really huge step. And I think there is a lot of people looking to get diagnosed in later life to help with their understanding of themselves. So for those that are listening who are maybe, wondering if this is something that might be relevant to them, or they're looking at getting diagnosed and having that right support around them, tell us what it is that you do and help us understand what would be their next steps. How do they start this journey? And also, is that a lengthy process as well?
Okay, so yes, there's really three main processes that you can go through if you are looking for a diagnosis. I think the first thing is to think about why do you want the diagnosis in the first place? So is it because you want to understand yourself? Is it because you want other people to understand you? So I think really drilling down as to why that diagnosis is important to you can often lead you in one direction or another. As Adele said, and Michelle and Alison, women especially who are neurodiverse suffer with that comparison that there's something wrong with me, that I should have done something different. And it's not just I should do something in the future. They very often live with regrets of behaviours they've had and things that they've done. So they're looking for an explanation quite often, or they may have seen it in their child. A school has diagnosed their child with ADHD and now they're recognising their own symptoms themselves. So if you are looking to have a diagnosis, the three ways you can go about this. One is a very slow route, I'm afraid, which is going via the NHS. So you would need, as an adult, you would need to go to your GP, who can refer you through your local CAMHS and NHS system. That will involve you having 2 or 3, usually about 90-minute meetings where they'll go through a diagnostic tool for you. There is now, in England only, the Right to Choose service. So you can, because the wait lists are so long, in Oxfordshire you're looking nearly 3 years now for if you go through the straight NHS route, but actually they can now do the Right to Choose. So you can go to your GP and you can say, I want to use a private company that is affiliated with the NHS. So they're all approved. And there's a whole list of them. If you go onto the Right to Choose, you'll be able to see a whole list. But your doctor needs to write that referral letter for you. So your first point of call, again, is back to your GP. Have that conversation with your GP, who will then do the referral for you. Now, you do have to think about whether you are wanting to be medicated or not. So psychologists can give you an ADHD diagnosis, but they cannot offer you medications. You would then have to go back into your GP system for medication. So if you were thinking about going down a private route, you would need to think about that very carefully. All the ones on the Right to Choose will be able to offer you medication, but if you wanted to go down a private route, you really need to think about who those practitioners are. Make sure they're a member of the General Medical Council to protect yourself, and think about whether or not you want to have medication at the end of the process. So those are your three main routes through. Now, you would also have to think about what is the long-term care that you would like to have afterwards. So for people who have received a diagnosis, for some people that can be a huge sense of relief as it explains symptoms and issues and feelings that they've had. But for other people, it can feel like a sense of loss. They can feel that actually there's something wrong with me, which we know there isn't, but some people can really feel that, and they struggle with how to talk to colleagues at work or to family about what that diagnosis means for them. So you need to think about that ongoing support. Most of the Right to Choose practitioners and even the private practitioners will refer you back to your GP for any long-term support. So your GP kind of gets in this big loop. He starts the process and he will very often be back to your GP. Now, some people do experience incidents with the GP where they refuse to actually do the referral for them, which they can't do, but they do actually in the first instance. But if you go on to adhd.co.uk, there are standardised referral letters there and standardised letters to send back to your GP if they have refused to do a referral for you. So there's a real clear step-by-step process there, both for adults going through who want to go through a diagnosis, but also for children as well. So if you are stuck at any point, if you just go onto that website, it will show you really clear step-by-step instructions.
That's so helpful. Like, it's funny because I've heard Right to Choose a lot, but I didn't really understand what that actually meant. So if somebody goes down the Right to Choose pathway, so they're being connected with private practitioners, do they then have to pay for that?
No, so they are practitioners that are paid for by the NHS. So it's a service that's been brought in because of the long wait lists.
Yeah.
And depending, so we have had experiences recently of people who have been seen within 2 to 3 months as opposed to 2 to 3 years. The wait lists in certain areas are getting longer as more people get to know about the Right to Choose. But if you are willing and able to travel, there are certain parts of the country where you could be seen within a matter of weeks. So it really is dependent on geography at the moment for some of it, but it's a lot quicker than going through the standard NHS route.
Yeah, it's so great to have your expertise as well. You know, because like when you talk about diagnosis there, like that's something that I work with individuals that are trying to almost move through that acceptance of new diagnoses. So I'd love to know a little bit more before we finish up, like on what you would advise next and what you do, like but as a practitioner, how you support these individuals as well.
Okay, so how I got into combining reflexology with looking at neurodiversity was I spent 20 years as a special educational needs coordinator in school, and then I retrained as a reflexologist. So, but the two callings just kept calling to me really to combine them.
Yeah.
So largely in schools, the children that get the sort of most support are those that act out. So boys with ADHD tend to be externalized. We know that. We see the impulsive behavior, we see the risk taking. But there's a whole group of girls in the schools who are the perfectionists, the ones who get upset when they get 9 out of 10 on a test rather than celebrating the 9 they've got. They're the ones that have those racing thoughts. They're the ones that are always self-critical. And it was looking at what we could do for those girls as well. And so we started looking at how reflexology can stimulate all of those nerves and the endocrine system so that we can put in a balance. So we look at rebalancing the whole body, how we can calm down those racing thoughts, how we can work with the gut, so we know the gut brain, as Michelle was talking to us, how we can work with the endocrine system that Adele was talking about. So we just try to work with the whole body, and we found that the boys were getting calmer and the girls were actually themselves becoming much more relaxed. So what we were doing was leaving the schools and the children, they would have their feet, which I would look at for them, but I was leaving with them hand reflexology so they could actually work on those points themselves when they were feeling heightened. So that worked really well. And then through that, we got obviously talking to mainly the mothers of those children who then themselves were coming in for treatment saying, you know, I recognise these signs in myself, can you support me as well? So that's sort of how the two have dovetailed together actually, which has been absolutely fascinating for me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting to see kind of how many different kind of disciplines can support like a neurodiverse individual really. And it's funny you mentioned that because I think since my daughter is 100% ADHD and things that you've been saying there like is absolutely on point. She is that kind of like I get 100%. But the things that you then start to see in yourself is amazing, because you do start to go, oh, hang on a minute, okay, I can see where this is connected. So it's really, really interesting, and having practitioners that can support every person in the family, I just think is absolutely amazing. So if there's any questions before we just finish up and break out into the rooms, if there's any questions, like broader questions that's maybe not specific, please do send them in the chat now and we can answer them. Otherwise, in a couple of minutes, we will break out into rooms. And if you want to break out into any of the practitioners' rooms here, you should be able to select the person that you want to. So we've got Michelle, who's nutritional therapist. We've got Linda, who's a reflexologist. We've got Alison Bell, who's Heal Your Life coach. And we have Adele, who is our women's health practitioner. So please do break out into any of those. But I hope that that's been really helpful for you guys, and that you guys have taken away at least something from this call tonight, because it is just so lovely to share some value with you. I know I personally have taken so much from all the women that have been on this call as well. So thank you for joining us, and for just being here and showing up for yourself as well, and giving yourself that time, because it will impact you in a positive way. So